Hello and welcome to the Thinking Cap Solutions podcast. We talk about everything content, audience and engagement. Episode 2, 2025, Mickey Ma.
Yes, good to see you, Corey. Great to be here. Excited for today's one. But before we get to it, though, I just wanted to do a bit of a shout out and a humble shout out, mate, because I was just looking, mate, we're already 10 episodes in total here. And I was looking yesterday, can you believe it? We've got people listening from 14 different countries around the world.
I did notice that. Some of the countries I've never heard of. Are we big in Japan? Where's the...
Japan is actually up there. What's the number 2 country behind Australia? Because clearly Australia's the number 1, but we're after Australia, do you reckon?
Oh, New Zealand. I've got the extended family there, so the numbers would be...
Sweden is number 2, followed by the US, Greece, India. New Zealand, mate, has got to lift their game. So I don't know what's going on with your family. Is there a bit of conflict going on here, mate? Because they're giving us crickets. I mean, they are seriously like down the bottom. So of the 14 countries, they're like right down.
Whereabouts?
13.
Which city?
Wellington.
I have no family or friends there. They're all in every other place.
You need to do an intervention on your family and say, come on, give us some love, please. But in all seriousness, for anyone listening, because we seriously thought we'd do this, and look, at best we might first get our immediate families and then if we're lucky, our extended families, clearly not Corey's. So to be sitting here right now and only 10 episodes in to go, wow, we've got people listening from 14 different countries is just amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, let's get into today's topic, Mickey. And it came about, and this is different to what we usually talk about. It's in the realms of leadership and teams, which we have, 30 plus years experience in different markets and all different dynamics and teams. And it was an article that you came across in LinkedIn.
Yeah, a guy called Chad Gono posted this article around toxic high performers. And the short version of the story is basically what he was saying is no matter how much of a high performer you are, if you are toxic, you're no good for culture, and good leaders should be getting rid of them. As soon as I read it, I was like, 100%, you're right.
If they're successful and they're bringing revenue, they're not going anywhere. I've probably seen too much, Mickey. And I know that's a fairly cynical way of looking at it, but that's instantly my gut reaction to it.
Yeah, and look, I hear you because reading through the thousands, and I do mean thousands of comments on it, it was such a diverse opinion base. You were either absolutely or, if only that was actually the reality of the world. So, and that's why, we thought we had to talk about this and share our experiences in this situation. Also, I think a chance to speak about, okay, let's be very clear on what toxic is, and also, I guess, share, our ways of how we've managed those situations that, if you're a leader or aspiring leader, then hopefully you can get some valuable tips out of it today.
So let's just try and break it down. I did come up with a little bit of a list because, I think it's important to be clear what toxic behavior actually is. So at its worst, it's bullying, which is unacceptable. Yep. Gossiping and manipulation, and you see a lot of that in the workplace, and that does nothing for productivity. Negativity, blame shifters.
Yep.
Passive aggressive behavior. That's in terms of what I see a lot of. There's plenty of that going on, and exclusion and favoritism. Now, there's obviously a lot more that you could add to that, but I think it's just good to get, okay, this is kind of what we're looking at, and we're going to talk about the misrepresentation of some of those as well. But on the surface, I look at all of those and I go, that can't be acceptable.
And I think that's where I come from on this. If you take the words to mean what they are, and in particular with what Chad wrote there around toxic behaviour, then to me, there is no question that that's no good for culture. I also understand and appreciate that in the real world, there are high performers out there that do get special treatment and are still in positions, and some managers and some employers will hold on to them at all costs. My read on that is you are risking your culture, and if you're risking your culture, then you're risking the peak performance that you ultimately need everyone to step up on, because high performers might bring in big bucks, but guess what? Without the so-called little people behind the scenes doing their job, they can't necessarily be the best they can be.
And I think let's not diminish the role and the importance of the high performer. There's a reason that I think a lot of the time they get away with certain behaviours, and that's because they clearly bring a lot to the table, Mickey, whether it is direct revenue or it's performance-based. If you're a business and you're in the business of making money and you've got a high performer who's generating a lot of that and you don't have anyone to replace them, it's not an easy thing to just make a decision based off their toxic, because it does come down to dollars and cents.
Yeah, and I respect that. And I don't think any flippant decision needs to be made quickly. I think with any of these situations, let it be a high performer or not, I think the best practice to how to approach that is address it in a timely manner, and then if the behaviour continues, then you have to make a really calculated, considered decision, and you hopefully are making a well-formed one because you've tried to do everything you can to address it, and that person's chosen not to change their ways.
Okay, special treatment for a toxic person because they're a high performer. I know it happens. I've seen it. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And do you believe that should be the case? Is that managing someone back into the business, or is that just encouraging or letting them get away with it because they're a high performer?
You're right. There are high performers that do get special treatment. But as I sit here right now, my view doesn't change that that shouldn't be the case. I understand they do, and I understand, but I don't agree with some of the reasons why. My approach on that is slightly different. My view is that every person is an individual. And as such, while everyone should have some basic foundations of behaviours and values within a culture, that you need to, as a leader, individualise how you manage people to get the best out of them. Our experience in the entertainment industry with high performers, they can be quite quirky and unique and come with their own baggage of insecurities, which does require a different way to manage them. So some people would see that as special treatment. I actually see it as individualised ways of managing them. Because if it's special treatment, and I have absolutely seen that, and I know managers that endorse that, it's detrimental to your culture. And I've seen what it can do to culture, and I also know what it looks like the other way because I've also led through challenging situations.
And I'm going to ask about it because, we've got a lot of experience, and I know having not been in the market, but us talking and sharing our war stories around a toxic person. We don't need to mention names or markets or anything like that, but you know who I'm talking about and the situation I'm talking about. So can you kind of set up exactly what the environment was? A high performer, obviously valuable to your team, toxic behaviour, and a team that were feeling the impact of that. Walk us through what that looks like, because that's a living, breathing example.
Look, I'd like to say toxic behaviour, not a toxic person. I don't believe anyone deliberately tries to be a bad person. But yeah, I was leading a market. This person was high profile and consistently showcasing toxic behaviour. Just about all of those words that you were saying, bullying people, verbal abuse, really almost self-sabotaging themselves, but also the impact it had on other people. And I saw everything from having, people taking days off because they couldn't be in the same environment, all of these kind of things. And it was a really massive learning curve for me. In fact, you know what? Critical to how it shaped and formed how I wanted to be as a leader. I learnt a lot through that process. Was I perfect in how I managed it? Maybe not, but I learnt a lot, and it absolutely set the foundations to the type of leader I wanted to be and the type of leader I believe I am today. And it required me a lot of time, sleepless nights sometimes on how to get through it.
Did you hire them, or had you come into that market? I don't think I.
No, I inherited the team that was there.
See, that's interesting, isn't it? When you inherit something and there's something toxic there. So I imagine you tried to manage them, what we call manage them back in, or deal with the behaviours first.
Yeah, because they were a high performer. They're fantastic, and still to this day, I think they're an exceptionally talented human being that is deserved of great things. But clearly, that environment wasn't right for them, and for other reasons, it was coming out in the type of behaviours that weren't acceptable in the team culture.
Okay, what type? Because there's all different types of toxic manipulation, and I've seen the manager be manipulated so that they cozy up to them. Which way did this person go? Did they try and bring you with them, or did you become the direction of their toxicity?
For a significant part of it, we had a wonderful relationship. They would speak straight, and I would speak straight, and there's this mutual respect for that. So I actually felt heard, which I think was also important for them to be heard. Where it started to break down was after several conversations of, here's that behaviour again, it can't continue. I can't support you much more if you're going to continue to act this way, because it's not acceptable and it's not okay, and I'm not going to pretend it is, and I'm not going to turn a blind eye. One, because it didn't sit the values that I wanted, but I also saw the impact it had on the team around me, and I needed to be able to look them in the eye and go, I care about you just as much as I care about this high performer. So it got to the point where I guess they got sick of me saying that and felt that I was starting to turn against them, even though I wasn't. I was turning against the behaviour, not the person. Yeah. And so ultimately that person was removed from the environment.
Yep. So did you become the enemy as far as they viewed you as the manager?
Possibly a little bit. Like I don't think we left on negative terms. And in fact, for years after, we would still exchange texts, hey, how are you going? And, and that kind of stuff. And so I didn't believe there to be. I think in those moments, it felt lonely for that person to go, I'm now not feeling heard, because I think they were looking for justification of what that behaviour being okay. And for me, it was like, no, I understand some of your points. So some of it was, I'm trying to drive a different, a certain amount of standards, or I want this. And some of that was, okay, well, that's fair. But how you're presenting that to others is not acceptable. So it became tricky. And you know what, the more I just was constantly having people, pull me aside and saying, this is impacting me. They did this to me today. They said this to me, or they're not doing this. They're ignoring me. And it's like, okay. So I needed to look them in the eye and go, okay, well, I need to be a leader, and I need to address this. And while they didn't need to be privy to the numerous amount of conversations that were happening and the detail within that, I needed them to feel confident that they were being heard and that Mickey's doing his best to address this. And I think ultimately when they were removed from that environment, they were, Mickey was true to his word. Now, I copped a lot of flack for it from some people up in management because, to your point earlier, they were a high performer. And with high performance becomes success, and that has impact when you remove them. And there was some small impact in the radio world, the ratings, and some of that has small impact to revenue. But I'll be honest, it didn't take too long for those things to bounce back. And you know what? It seems probably maybe irresponsible for me as a leader to say this, but that wasn't as important to me as keeping that culture right. Because otherwise we're going to get all these other people leave the business. And I don't believe high performers can do it on their own. Any great high performer, even in the sporting world, even in the entertainment industry, Taylor Swift or whatever, they need great people around them to allow them to be great. And I think even people that present toxic behaviour still need great people around them. But if you start to burn bridges and burn people, pretty quickly you're lonely. And to me, it doesn't allow you to be your best.
Okay, there's a great example of toxic behaviour and managing it through and managing it out. I want to talk about the misrepresentation of some people who, because we've mentioned, high performers, I see the really good ones can be quite difficult and challenging. And I say that in the nicest possible way, in that usually they've got a lot on the line, sometimes more than you as the manager. So in our instance, it means a radio show that is public facing and has billboards and has ratings results that are made to the public. So everything is on the line, and they're putting it all on the line every day when they're on air. When you have so much at stake, there's certain behaviours that drives greatness. And I look at, as the documentary The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. Now, I think we could all say one of the most successful sportsmen, probably the greatest sportsman of all time. He came out of that documentary potentially with a reputation of being seen as a tyrant. And even some of the players said that. And he did. I forget, I think the centre, he goes, he was a tyrant. But then in the next breath, if he wasn't, I wouldn't have achieved what I achieved. So he was saying it in terms of he was driving the standards. Yeah. He was holding us accountable. And I think it can, and this is where all the different personalities, and I think managers need to step up as well, but it can be misrepresented. All of that, bullying, passive-aggressive, control freak, all of that stuff. Sometimes it's actually about driving performance.
You are 100% spot on it. And I've seen it numerous times, and I've had conversations with people when they've come to me with, statements or accusations about people to go, this person's bullying, or this person's difficult, or this person's toxic. So, well, hang on a minute. What are they saying or doing to do that? And let's be very clear on what is and what isn't. And to me, there's not a grey line between what is and what isn't. To me, there's a grey line between how we mispresent or how we label people for that exact reason. And just because part of how you go about business is holding people to a higher regard, there's nothing toxic about that, unless it's how you present to that. But holding people to high account and high regard is, I would think, is fantastic for culture. So you touched on it a second ago there, and I'm a big believer in this as well. A lot more responsibility needs to come back on the employer and the manager, because get it right from the get-go. That is, when you're hiring someone, make sure they've got the skills and the capability and the personality traits that you know are going to fit the job, do the job and fit the culture. And if you do that properly, it's pretty clear from the get-go, okay, this is an environment where, one, I can be heard, two, I can challenge as long as I do it in an appropriate way, and I can hold others and myself to a high regard. And to me, that's exceptionally healthy for any kind of culture. And I think in particular now in a world where diversity is not just a buzzword, it's thankfully far more accepted and important for business growth, that you are going to get such diverse ways of thinking and personality traits that not managed well, not set up well, is going to potentially cause a lot of friction, a lot of clashing unless you set it up early.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that, because I instantly go back to the really good teams that I've worked with. Having challenging people and challenging conversations and robustness inside of that, I call it being respectfully robust, is really important if you want to have a team that's moving things forward. And this is where your high performers, I think, play a really key role. If you want beige and boring, then just hire mediocrity. You want high performers, I just think they come with probably a little bit more management, because they are more often than not going to be really big personalities and leaders in their own right. Like, I think of all the high performers that we've worked with, they've been the leaders of be it a show or be it a content team or be it in the production area. They're leaders within the team as well, and you need to lead them as such. And I think when this, bullying and toxic behavior, sometimes, because a lot of them don't have the training that we get through our journey as leaders. So I think it's about catching up with them, and sometimes you do need to modify their behaviour. And going back to Michael Jordan again, Phil Jackson would chuck him out of training at times because he went over the line in terms of how it wasn't toxic behaviour, but it was like you can't just communicate to people like that.
Spot on, yeah. And you're right. We're talking from our experience in 30 odd years in media, but it's across any industry.
Yep.
If you're a salesperson, let it be real estate or selling cars or whatever.
No, mate, sales are the worst. What are you talking about?
It's those high performers, yeah, they do. But like anyone, needs to be managed in different ways, because they have quite often will have different standards, not necessarily better or worse, just different standards. And as employers, we need to set them up for success, and that sometimes knowing how to get the best out of it. So could be, okay, not putting them in certain situations, even though you that's how you'd like to do it, but it's just not going to work because you know that's going to cause friction or whatever. That's not special treatment. That's just smart management. And if you don't mind me using another sporting analogy, apologies for anyone that doesn't like sport. I love my AFL. So some names that come to mind for me, a guy called Joe Danaher, who played for the Brisbane Lions. He's retired at the end of last year. Lachie Neale from the Brisbane Lions. Buddy Franklin, who was a legend of Hawthorn and played for the Sydney Swans. Just to name a couple of those. Gary Ablett Jr., who was at Geelong and the Gold Coast Suns. Just a couple of examples, and there's many of these in the AFL where there's certain times that they don't train with the main group. They'll have modified training, not just because they're coming back from injuries, but because the coaches know them best and know how to get them ready to be that high performer on match day. So it's about going, okay, that's not special treatment. That's just being smart. And that would be my recommendation to, again, any leader, aspiring leader here, to go, there's a difference between special treatment and adaptive management of people to get the best out of them. So where do you need them to be? What's that end game you want? Let it be selling cars, selling real estate, performing on the radio, whatever it might be. What do you need them to do? And what's the environment I can put around them to allow them to do that? For example, we know a lot of high performers, they're no good in meetings. So don't have them sit in an hour strategy meeting. That's no good.
Yep.
That's not special treatment. It's just you have them there. They're just going to cause grief for everyone, not contribute it, because it's just not their strength. So you've just got to be smart around how you go about it.
I want to just move us on to what I think is a really important part of this, and that is the leader and the manager appropriately dealing with someone who might be what we'd call a high performer who's difficult and challenging, but labelling them toxic. And I've seen this, and this is where I think leadership and management are quite weak, in that rather than deal with it and have a tough conversation, they label them and don't actually work with them. And I think as managers, as leaders, we're there to make people better, and we're also there to manage the situation and try and manage them back in. You talked about that earlier.
I think that's where a lot of leaders or managers come unstuck. And I can empathise with potentially whys, because I don't think managing conflict is a natural trait for anyone, or no one necessarily goes, I love conflict, so I'm going to lean into it. But the reality is any great leader appreciates and respects the importance of dealing with conflict. So you're right, where it can come undone, and this is where as leaders or managers that want to be leaders need to be better, is understand the value of leaning into that. You don't have to like it, but understand if you avoid it, you're not only damaging your own growth, you're damaging the person that's perhaps doing the behaviour that you're avoiding, but the impact it's having on the team. And also keep in mind, dealing with conflict's not about being right or wrong. It's not about you versus them. It's actually, if you do it in a respectful way, it's actually a mutual respect to go, all right, let's get on the same page here, because we're not at the minute. I'm seeing these kind of behaviours. It's not cool. What's going on? Because back to my philosophy of no one deliberately does a bad job or wants to be a bad person, when you start digging deeper, more often than not, there's something going on that's driving that stuff. Now, it could be things that are going on at home that just happens to seep into the workplace. It might be just circumstantial that they're, having a bit of a tiff, lover's tiff with someone in the office or whatever. That's, circumstantial but needs to be addressed. More often than not, there's things underlying that's doing that.
It's what you signed up for, to not have those conversations. And thinking of an example in my career, I left a radio station, got promoted, and the leader coming in, I remember having a chat with them, and the existing show had a cast member who was, their standards were super high, and they were seen as difficult and challenging, but you'd manage the situation. I remember talking to them and letting them know at some stage you're going to have to manage them, because they are going to be outspoken and they're going to challenge your leadership. They were very alpha. 5 weeks down the track, rather than have those conversations and manage the situation, they labelled them as toxic, so they weren't given a fair chance, and they were gone from the show. And the fallout from that was, this person doesn't have a job, and that show fell apart, and they ended up recasting the entire show, and it was obliterated. And I think for the sake of a conversation, and sometimes with this person, you did need to put them in their box, and manage them pretty tightly. But you want people like that in there because they drove really high standards. And I don't know about you, but I like having people like that around me. And if it means managing the situation at times, I'm okay with that.
I don't just like it, I need it.
There you go.
And I think every leader should be expecting a culture of diverse ways of thinking, and not just on a gender level, because I think that's important, but skill sets, mindsets, opinions, all of those kind of things are so much better when you've got people that can challenge you, because it only makes you better.
Yep.
And it's actually what I really enjoyed about our time working together in media, mate. At times we were working as peers, and other times there was where I was your manager, is that you and I had a respect for each other where we could speak straight, and you could challenge me on things and I didn't feel threatened by it. I knew it was coming from a really good place. And I think that's the other thing here. If it comes from a good place, encourage that. Because it takes a lot for people to go, hang on, I'm going to challenge my manager on something. As long as they do it respectfully, what a wonderful thing. Okay, tell me why you think that. Because that might just open your mind to a different way of thinking. Go, you know what? Yeah, we have always done it that way. But why wouldn't we try this? Fantastic. Let's give it a go.
We could talk forever about the topic, and I think that was the beauty of what the LinkedIn article or the banner actually said. It did promote some really lively conversation.
Yeah, so look, let's be clear here. There is no room for any kind of toxic behaviour in any culture, and particularly if we're true to what the meaning of toxic behaviours are. Respect that it can be difficult if you're a leader or an employer and you've got high performers, and you can the real risk of losing those people. But our advice is the behaviours need to be dealt with in a timely manner. Repeated behaviour needs to be addressed in a more significant way if required, but also have an open mind to misuse of labelling people. So seek to understand before you jump to conclusions or make assessments based on just what other people say, because you might actually uncover that there's things that you can do to help get this person back on track and manage them in, as you say.
And I highly recommend for any young managers out there, I was given this by my manager, Mickey, when I started dealing with some difficult personalities or challenging ones, and it was called the Tough Conversation Sheet. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll be there. And it essentially gives you a platform or some thinking around what might come back at you so that you're prepared and ready for the answers. Because it is intimidating at times to have these chats, but this tough conversation sheet just gives you a really good, meaningful structure before you go in.
Yeah, and you're not alone. There is great support out there. Let it be articles, but people that are prepared to be mentor, people that are prepared to be mentors and to help you out along the way. And in fact, we'd love to hear from you if there's something that you want to share as your experience with dealing with high performers that are toxic behaviour. You can get in contact with us in a couple of ways. LinkedIn, Thinking Cap Solutions, all one word, or our website, thinkingcapsolutions.com.au.